The auctioneer's hammer struck wood like thunder. 3 orphan boys, $3 each. In the dusty Missouri town square, children stood with burlap sacks over their heads, hands bound with rope. Clara Boone pushed through the horrified crowd, her widow's dress still black from mourning. When she bought all 3 boys without hesitation, the smallest one whispered through his sack, "Mrs. Boone." He'd never seen her face, never heard her name, yet he knew her. How could a child she'd never met know exactly who she was? Stay with me to discover this extraordinary story, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this tale has traveled. The morning sun cast long shadows across Hartsville's main street as Clara Boone stood at her husband's grave, pressing her weathered fingers against the cold stone. 3 years had passed since pneumonia took Samuel, leaving her with 40 acres of Missouri farmland and a silence so heavy it pressed against her chest each morning when she woke. "Another day, Sam," she whispered to the headstone, arranging fresh wildflowers she'd picked from the meadow behind their barn. "The corn's coming in strong this year. You'd be proud." But Samuel couldn't answer, and Clara knew she was merely talking to herself again, as she had every morning for the past 1,000 days. At 52, with no children and no family within 500 miles, she'd become a ghost haunting her own life. The walk back to town took her past the Hendersons' farm, where children's laughter spilled over the fence posts like water over stones. She quickened her pace. The general store would be opening soon, and she needed supplies for the week ahead. Flour salt, perhaps some new thread to mend the torn curtains in the parlor that she never used anymore. Main Street bustled with its usual Saturday morning crowd. Farmers brought their goods to market, wives clustered around the milliner's window display, and the smell of fresh bread from Willer's bakery made Clara's stomach remember she hadn't eaten since yesterday noon. She'd simply forgotten again. But something was different this morning. A crowd had gathered near the courthouse steps, their voices carrying a mixture of outrage and morbid curiosity. Clara noticed Martha Phillips, the minister's wife, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth, her face pale as winter cream. "It's ungodly," Martha was saying to anyone who would listen. "Selling children like cattle, in broad daylight no less." Clara's feet moved before her mind could process the words. She pushed gently through the crowd, her black dress parting the colorful fabrics like a shadow through light. What she saw at the center of the gathering stopped her heart mid-beat. A man in a stained leather vest stood on a makeshift platform, nothing more than old shipping crates stacked together. Beside him, 3 boys stood in a line. Burlap sacks covered their heads, tied loosely at the neck. Their hands were bound in front of them with coarse rope, and their clothes, if the tattered rags could be called such, hung from their thin frames like Spanish moss from dying trees. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man called out, his voice carrying the smooth oil of a practiced salesman and the underlying rot of someone who'd sold his soul long ago. 3 strong boys, orphans, all ready for work. No family to come claiming them, no past to haunt your doorstep. $3 each, or 8 for the lot. The smallest boy on the end swayed slightly, his bare feet shifting on the splintered wood. Even through the sack, Clara could see his shoulders shaking from fear or exhaustion, she couldn't tell. The middle boy stood rigid as a fence post, his chin raised in defiance despite his covered face. The tallest on the far left had his head bowed so low the sack nearly touched his chest. "This is barbaric, Mr. Crane," Judge Morrison said from the crowd, though he made no move to stop it. "Surely there must be proper channels." "All legal and proper, Judge," Crane replied, producing a folded document from his vest. "Got the papers right here from the county. These boys were abandoned at the orphanage in Jefferson City. The place burned down last month. Surely you heard the state's overwhelmed with displaced children. I'm simply facilitating their placement in good Christian homes where they can earn their keep. By selling them." Dr. Whitman's voice cut through the morning air. "These are children, not livestock." Crane's smile revealed teeth stained brown from tobacco. "Would you prefer they starve on the streets, Doctor? Or perhaps you'd like to take all 3 yourself? Feed them from your own table." The doctor fell silent, as did the rest of the crowd. Times were hard. The drought last year had left many families struggling to feed their own children, let alone take in strangers. $2 for the tall one," called out Cyrus McKenna, who owned the largest farm in the county. "He looks strong enough for field work." $3 as advertised, Crane countered. These boys might be thin now, but feed them regular, and they'll work harder than any grown man. Desperate souls always do. Clara's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging crescents into her palms. The smallest boy stumbled, and the middle one instantly moved closer, their bound hands preventing him from offering real support, but trying nonetheless. "They're brothers?" someone asked. "Does it matter?" Crane shrugged. "Buy one or buy all three. Makes no difference to me, though I'd recommend separating them breaks the wild spirit faster when they don't have each other to lean on." The casual cruelty of his words hit Clara like a physical blow. She thought of her own brothers dead now, 20 years from scarlet fever. She remembered how they'd held hands even in their delirium, refusing to be separated even as the sickness took them. "I'll take them." The words left her mouth before she'd fully formed the thought. The crowd turned as one to stare at her, the widow Boone, who rarely spoke to anyone beyond the necessary pleasantries. Crane's eyebrows rose. "All three, ma'am. All three." Clara stepped forward, her chin raised. $8, you said." Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Martha Phillips grabbed her arm. "Clara, dear, think about what you're doing. You don't know anything about these boys. They could be dangerous, disturbed." "They're children," Clara said quietly, but with steel beneath the softness. "And they're afraid." She pulled her arm free and approached the platform, reaching into her purse for the money she'd brought to town, her savings for winter supplies. $8 would leave her with barely enough for flour and salt, but looking at those three small figures with their covered heads and bound hands, she knew she'd never sleep again if she walked away. As she counted out the bills, the smallest boy turned his head toward her. Through the rough weave of the burlap, she thought she could make out the shadow of eyes looking directly at her. "Mrs. Boone," the child whispered so soft that only she and Crane heard it. Crane's hand froze halfway to taking the money. "What did you say, boy?" "Mrs. Boone," the child repeated slightly louder this time. "She's Mrs. Boone." The middle boy's head snapped up. "Milo, hush." But the damage was done. The crowd pressed closer, and Clara felt her heart racing. How could this child know her name? She'd never seen these boys before, she was certain of it. She rarely left her farm, and when she did come to town, she spoke to almost no one. "You know this woman, boy?" Crane grabbed the smallest boy, Milo, by the shoulder, shaking him roughly. "You've been lying to me about having no family." "No, sir." Milo's voice was thin but certain. "Never seen her before, but I know she's Mrs. Boone. I just know." Judge Morrison stepped forward. "This is highly irregular. If these boys have family—" "They don't," Clara interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. She pressed the $8 into Crane's hand before he could pull it away. "You have your money. They're mine now." Crane looked like he wanted to argue, but the bills in his hand seemed to quiet his objections. He pocketed the money quickly, as if afraid she might change her mind. "They're your problem now, lady. Don't come crying to me when they rob you blind and burn your house down." He pulled out a knife and cut the ropes binding their hands, then roughly pulled the sacks from their heads. Clara's breath caught. The boys were younger than she'd expected. The tallest couldn't be more than 12, with dark hair that fell over eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was all angles and wariness, jaw set in a hard line that belonged on someone 3 times his age. The middle boy, perhaps 10, had sandy brown hair and green eyes that blazed with protective fury. His fists were clenched, and he positioned himself slightly in front of the smallest boy. And the smallest Milo couldn't be more than 7. His hair was the color of corn silk, matted and dirty, but still catching the morning light. His eyes were the palest blue Clara had ever seen, like winter sky reflected in ice. He looked directly at her with an expression of such complete trust that it nearly broke her heart. "Hello, Mrs. Boone," Milo said, as if they were old friends meeting at the market. "I knew you'd come." "How?" Clara whispered. "How did you know my name?" Milo tilted his head, considering the question as if it were perfectly reasonable. "God told me. In a dream. He said you'd be wearing black and you'd be sad, but you'd take us home." The crowd murmured uneasily. Martha Phillips crossed herself. Someone muttered about possession and devils. But Clara looked into those pale blue eyes and saw only innocence, strange, unsettling innocence, but innocence nonetheless. "What are your names?" she asked, addressing all three boys. The tallest spoke first, his voice cracking slightly. "Ben, this is Harris." He indicated the middle boy. "And you already heard that's Milo. No last names." "None that matter anymore," Ben said flatly. Clara nodded slowly. "Well then, Ben Harris and Milo. I'm Clara Boone, and I have a farm about 3 miles north of here. Would you like to come home with me?" Harris's green eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Why, what do you want from us?" "Nothing," Clara said, and realized as she said it that it wasn't quite true. "Actually, that's not right. I want my house to not be empty anymore. I want to cook for more than just myself. I want to hear voices that aren't my own echo." "Is that too much to ask?" The honesty of her words seemed to catch the boys off guard. Ben's defensive posture softened slightly. Harris unclenched his fists, and Milo stepped forward, slipping his small hand into hers as naturally as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. "We can be loud," Milo said seriously. "Harris sings sometimes, and Ben tells stories. I have nightmares and wake up screaming. Is that okay?" Clara squeezed his hand gently. "That's more than okay." She looked at the other two boys. "I have a wagon at the general store. Are you ready to leave this place?" Ben and Harris exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Ben nodded. "We're ready." As Clara led the boys through the parting crowd, she heard the whispers following them like shadows. "Foolish woman. She'll regret this. Those boys will be the death of her. Mark my words, no good will come of this." But Clara kept walking, Milo's hand warm in hers, Ben and Harris, flanking them like wary guardians. She thought of the empty house waiting for them, of the 3 empty bedrooms that had never held children of the garden that could use more hands of the dinner table, with its 6 chairs, where she only ever used one. At the general store, Mr. Henderson was loading the supplies she'd ordered into her wagon. He stopped when he saw her approaching with the boys, his eyes widening. "Mrs. Boone, are these are Ben Harris and Milo," she said simply. "They'll be living with me now." To his credit, Henderson only nodded. "Boys look like they could use a good meal. Martha just made fresh bread this morning. Let me add a few loaves to your order, no charge." "That's kind of you, Mr. Henderson." As he added the bread to her supplies, Clara helped the boys into the wagon. They moved stiffly as if expecting some trick, some last-moment cruelty. Ben climbed up first, then turned to help Harris, who in turn lifted Milo. They arranged themselves in the back among the supplies, careful not to disturb anything. "You can move things if you need more room," Clara said. "We're fine," Ben replied quickly. "We don't take up much space." The response hurt her heart in ways she couldn't articulate. How long had these boys been trained to make themselves small, to take up as little room as possible in the world? Clara climbed onto the driver's seat and took the reins. As they pulled away from town, she could feel the eyes of the townspeople following them. Let them look, she thought. Let them whisper and judge. They didn't know what it was like to wake up every morning to a silence so complete it felt like drowning. The road home wound through stands of oak and hickory, their leaves just beginning to turn with the first hints of autumn. Milo started humming something, a tune Clara didn't recognize but found oddly soothing. Harris jabbed him with an elbow to make him stop, but Clara said, "It's all right. I like music." "Milo's always making noise," Harris said, but there was affection beneath the annoyance. "Can't help himself." "Been that way since he was a baby," and Ben added, then caught himself as if he'd revealed too much. "You've been together a long time then?" Clara asked carefully, not wanting to push, but desperately curious about these boys who'd entered her life so suddenly. "Always," Milo said simply. "We're brothers." "Not by blood," Ben corrected quickly. "But, yeah, brothers." Clara nodded, understanding more than they were saying. Sometimes family was about more than blood. Sometimes it was about who stood by you when the world tried to tear you down. The farmhouse came into view as they crested the hill, white clapboard with green shutters, a wraparound porch that Samuel had built with his own hands, the red barn standing proud against the horizon. The The cornfields stretched out on either side, tall and green, whispering secrets to the wind. "It's beautiful," Milo breathed. "It's big," Harris said, suspicion creeping back into his voice. "How many people live here?" "Just me," Clara said. "It's been just me for 3 years now." Ben studied her with those storm cloud eyes. "Your husband passed away. Pneumonia. Children." Clara's hands tightened on the reins. "We weren't blessed that way." An understanding passed between them, these orphans and this childless widow. They were all missing pieces of what the world said a family should be. As Clara pulled the wagon up to the house, the front door seemed to stand open in welcome, though she knew she'd locked it that morning. A trick of the light, perhaps, or maybe the house itself knew that its long loneliness was finally ending. "Come on," she said, climbing down. "Let me show you your rooms." "Rooms?" Harris asked. "Plural. 3 bedrooms, sitting empty upstairs," Clara said. "Though you can share if you'd prefer. I understand if you don't want to be separated." The boys exchanged those glances again, their silent language that spoke of survival and loyalty, and fears she could only imagine. "We'll stay together," Ben decided. "At least at first, if that's acceptable." "Whatever makes you comfortable," Clara assured them. She led them inside through the front hallway, with its grandfather clock that had stopped keeping time the day Samuel died, past the parlor, with its dust-covered furniture, into the kitchen that still smelled faintly of this morning's coffee. The boys stood clustered in the doorway as if afraid to enter without explicit permission. Clara's heart ached at their caution. "Are you hungry?" she asked. Milo's stomach answered for him, growling loud enough to echo off the walls. Harris looked mortified, but Clara laughed. Actually laughed for the first time, and she couldn't remember how long. "I'll take that as a yes. Sit down at the table while I heat up some stew." They moved toward the table slowly, Ben pulling out chairs for his younger brothers before taking his own seat. They sat with their backs straight, hands folded in their laps, eyes tracking her every movement as she bustled around the kitchen. She ladled generous portions of yesterday's beef stew into bowls, sliced thick pieces of the fresh bread Henderson had given them, and set it all on the table with butter and the strawberry preserves she'd made last month when the loneliness had been so bad she'd needed to keep her hands busy or go mad. The boys stared at the food but didn't move. "Go on," Clara urged. "Eat." "All of it," Milo whispered. "We can eat all of it. Every bite if you're hungry enough." They fell on the food like starving wolves, though they tried to maintain some semblance of manners. Clara noticed Ben tearing his bread into portions, automatically setting some aside. Saving it, she realized, in case there was no next meal. Harris ate methodically, as if counting each bite. Only Milo ate with anything approaching normal childhood enthusiasm, and even he kept glancing at her as if expecting the bowl to be snatched away. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Clara asked gently. Ben shrugged. "Define proper." "The orphanage burned 2 weeks ago," Harris said quietly. "We've been with Crane since then. He didn't see the point in wasting food on merchandise." The casual way he said it, merchandise, made Clara's stomach turn. She pushed her own bowl away, her appetite gone. "You're not merchandise," she said firmly. "You're children. You're people. And as long as you're under my roof, you'll eat 3 meals a day, and snacks if you're hungry between." "Understood." Milo's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you being so nice to us?" It was such a simple question, but Clara found she didn't have a simple answer. How could she explain the suffocating loneliness, the weight of a house too full of memories and too empty of life? How could she tell them that when Milo had whispered her name through that burlap sack, it was the first time in 3 years she'd felt like she had a purpose beyond merely existing? "Maybe," she said carefully, "we can be nice to each other. Maybe we all need that right now." Ben set down his spoon, studying her with those 2 old eyes. "What's the catch?" "There's always a catch." "No catch. Though I won't lie, this is a working farm. There are chores to be done, animals to tend, crops to bring in. I could use the help, and you'd be learning useful skills. But you're not slaves or servants. Well, I suppose we'll figure out what you are as we go." "We're good workers," Harris said quickly. "We won't be trouble." I'm not worried about trouble, Clara said, though she suspected that wasn't entirely true. These boys had been through something likely, many somethings that had left them scarred in ways she was only beginning to see. There would be trouble of some kind, she was sure, but looking at them sitting at her table, filling her kitchen with the sound of spoons against bowls and quiet breathing and life, she found she didn't care. After they'd eaten their fill and Clara had convinced Ben that yes, he could eat the bread he'd set aside, she showed them upstairs. The second floor had 4 rooms, her bedroom at the end of the hall, and 3 others that had stood empty waiting for children who never came. She opened the door to the largest room, which faced east and caught the morning sun. It had a big bed that Samuel had built, expecting someday to fill this house with sons and daughters, and a window that looked out over the cornfields. "This could be yours," she said. "All 3 of you could fit comfortable in that bed, or I can bring in additional mattresses." The boys stood in the doorway staring at the clean white sheets, the quilts folded at the foot of the bed, the washstand with its porcelain pitcher and bowl. "It's so clean," Harris whispered. "When did you last have a bath, Mom?" Clara asked, noting the dirt caked under their fingernails, the grime on their necks. They looked at each other uncertainly. "The orphanage had a bath day once a week," Ben said, "but that was before—" "Right. Well, let's remedy that. I'll heat water for baths, and while you're washing, I'll see what I can do about finding you some clean clothes. My husband's things might be too big, but we can make them work until I can get to town for proper fitting clothes." "You don't have to," Ben started. "I want to," Clara interrupted. "Please, let me do this." There must have been something in her voice, some note of need that matched their own, because Ben stopped protesting. As Clara heated water for the baths, carrying bucket after bucket up the stairs to fill the tub in the washroom, the boys helped. They insisted on it, actually, Harris and Ben carrying the heavier buckets, while Milo brought towels and soap. They worked with the efficiency of those used to hard labor. But Clara noticed the way they kept looking around, as if memorizing exits, cataloging potential hiding places. Milo went first, being the smallest and the dirtiest. Clara could hear him splashing in the tub, actually giggling, a sound so pure and unexpected it made her stop in the hallway and press her hand to her heart. When had this house last heard a child's laughter? While Milo bathed, she went to the trunk in her bedroom where she'd stored Samuel's clothes. She'd meant to give them away, but never could bring herself to do it. Now pulling out shirts and trousers, she felt like Samuel would approve. He'd always wanted this house full of children. She found a shirt that might work for Ben, if rolled up at the sleeves, trousers that could be cinched with a belt for Harris and for Milo. Well, everything would be comically large, but they'd make do. When Milo emerged from the washroom, his skin pink from scrubbing and his hair several shades lighter than it had appeared, Clara wrapped him in a towel and helped him into one of Samuel's undershirts, which fell to his knees like a nightgown. "You look like a ghost," Harris teased, but gently. "A clean ghost," Milo countered, grinning. As Harris took his turn in the bath, Clara sat with Milo on the bed, gently working a comb through his tangled hair. The boy sat perfectly still occasionally, humming that same tune from the wagon. "Where did you learn that song?" Clara asked. "I don't know," Milo said. "It's just always been in my head, like your name was." "That must have been frightening, knowing things without knowing how you know them." Milo shrugged. "Not really. It's like how you know the sun will rise tomorrow. You just know. And you knew I would come. I knew someone would come. And then when I felt you get close, I knew it was you and I knew your name." He turned to look at her with those pale eyes. "You were so sad. I could feel it all the way through the sack, like a cloud of sadness walking around in a black dress." Clara's hand stilled on the comb. "I was sad. I am sad sometimes. But not right now." She considered this. "No, not right now." Harris emerged from the bathroom, his sandy hair sticking up in all directions, and Ben took his turn. Clara found herself falling into a rhythm she didn't know she remembered, the rhythm of caring for others, of tending to needs beyond her own. She helped Harris into clothes that were only slightly too big, rolled-up sleeves and trouser cuffs, found an old leather belt that had belonged to her father and punched new holes in it to make it small enough. By the time Ben finished bathing, the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara had laid out clothes for him and returned downstairs to start dinner, giving the boys privacy to dress and settle in. She could hear them moving around upstairs, their voices a low murmur of conversation. Not arguing, she noted with relief, just talking. The floorboards creaked under their feet, sounds this house hadn't heard in so long. She was peeling potatoes when Ben appeared in the kitchen doorway. Samuel's clothes fit him better than expected, though still loose in the shoulders. He'd combed his wet hair back, revealing a face that was handsome despite its wariness, with strong features that would someday mature into something striking. "Can I help?" he asked. "You can sit and talk to me if you like," Clara offered. "Tell me about yourself." Ben took a seat at the table, his posture still guarded. "Not much to tell. Parents died when I was 6. Been in orphanages and foster homes since then. Met Harris when I was 8 and he was 6. Milo came to us as a baby. Someone left him on the orphanage doorstep in the middle of winter. Would have frozen to death if Harris hadn't heard him crying. And you've stayed together all this time. Not always by choice. Sometimes they'd separate us, send us to different homes. But we always found our way back to each other. Harris would run away, or I'd cause enough trouble to get sent back, or Milo would..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Milo would know things, freak people out. They'd return him quick enough after that." "What kind of things?" Ben looked at her steadily. "You want the truth. Always. He knows when people are going to die. Not always, not everyone. But sometimes. He told Mrs. Garrett at our last foster home that she should see a doctor about the pain in her chest. She laughed it off, said it was just indigestion. 3 days later, she had a heart attack in the general store. Died before the doctor could get there. Clara absorbed this information, surprised to find she wasn't frightened or skeptical. After all, the boy had known her name without ever seeing her face. "That must be a heavy burden for such a small child," she said. Ben's eyes widened slightly, as if her response wasn't what he'd expected. "Most people say he's possessed, or touched in the head, or lying. Do you think he's any of those things?" "No. I think Milo sees the world different from the rest of us, like he's got 1 foot here and 1 foot somewhere else. It scares people." "Does it scare you?" Ben considered this. "No, it's useful sometimes. He knew which foster fathers to avoid, which families would feed us, and which would starve us. He knew that Crane was coming before we saw him. Tried to warn the orphanage director, but nobody listened. The fire started that same night." "The fire was deliberately set." Ben shrugged. "Can't prove anything." But Crane showed up the next morning with his wagon and his papers ready to collect the merchandise. Made a deal with the county to take us problem children off their hands. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. And nobody questioned this. Well, who's going to question it? We're orphans, no family, no money, no rights. We're lucky you came along when you did. Crane had other buyers, interested men who wanted strong backs for their minds, women who wanted household slaves. At least with you, he trailed off. At least with me, what? Milo said you were safe, said you had a good heart buried under all that sadness. He's never been wrong about people. Before Clara could respond, Harris and Milo came thundering down the stairs, Milo riding on Harris's back, both of them laughing. They stopped abruptly when they saw Ben and Clara at the table, suddenly self-conscious. "Sorry," Harris said, quickly setting Milo down. "We didn't mean to be loud." "Be as loud as you want," Clara said, meaning it. "This house has been quiet for too long." She returned to making dinner, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from her garden, and an apple pie she'd baked yesterday when the loneliness had driven her to keep her hands busy. The boys watched her work with fascination, occasionally offering to help, but she waved them off. "Tonight you rest," she said. "Tomorrow we'll figure out routines and chores and all that. Tonight you're just 3 boys who need a good meal and a safe place to sleep." They ate dinner as the sun set, casting golden light through the kitchen windows. Milo told a rambling story about a dog he'd once befriended at one of the orphanages. Harris corrected his details with fond exasperation, and Ben watched it all with a protective vigilance that never quite relaxed. After dinner, they helped clear the table without being asked, moving with the practiced efficiency of those used to earning their keep. Clara showed them where things went, and soon they had a system. Ben washing, Harris drying Milo, carefully putting dishes away on the lower shelves he could reach. "We had a dog once," Clara said suddenly, surprising herself. Samuel brought him home as a puppy, called him Bartholomew of all things. That dog would steal entire pies off the windowsill if you weren't watching. What happened to him? Milo asked. Old age, Clara said. Died peaceful in his sleep about a year before Samuel passed. Probably for the best. I don't think I could have borne taking care of him alone. You could get another dog, Harris suggested. We could help take care of it. Clara looked at the three boys in her kitchen already discussing what kind of dog would be best for a farm and felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of grief she'd held so tight for so long. As darkness fell properly, she showed the boys the lamp in their room, made sure they had everything they needed. They climbed into this big bed together, Milo in the middle, bracketed by his protective brothers. We'll work hard tomorrow, Ben said, as if afraid she might change her mind overnight. We're good workers, I promise. I know you are, Clara said, but tonight just sleep. You're safe here. She was almost to the door when Milo's voice stopped her. Mrs. Boone, what if I have nightmares? I have them sometimes, and I scream, and then I'll come sit with you until they pass, Clara said simply. That's what families do. The word hung in the air, families. None of them quite ready to claim it yet, but all of them feeling its possibility. Clara left their door slightly ajar and went to her own room. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel the oppressive weight of the empty house pressing down on her. She could hear the boys whispering to each other the creak of the bed as they settled in Milo's quiet humming of that mysterious tune. She thought about the town's reaction, the whispers that would follow her for weeks to come. She thought about Crane and his casual cruelty, about the papers he'd waved, and the system that allowed children to be sold like property. She thought about Ben's wariness, Harris's fierce protectiveness, and Milo's inexplicable knowledge. None of it mattered. What mattered was that her house was no longer empty. What mattered was that 3 boys who'd been marked as merchandise were now safe in a warm bed. What mattered was that tomorrow, for the first time in years, she would wake up with a purpose beyond mere survival. A sound from down the hall, Milo's voice high and frightened. No, no, please! Clara was out of bed and halfway down the hall before she'd fully woken up. She found Milo thrashing in his sleep, tears streaming down his face, while Ben and Harris tried to calm him without waking him clearly, a practiced routine. It's the fire dream, Harris whispered. He has it almost every night since the orphanage burned. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, gently placing her hand on Milo's forehead. The boy was burning up sweat, soaking through the nightshirt. Milo, she said softly, you're safe. The fire is gone. You're in a house with strong walls and people who care about you. Milo's eyes flew open, those pale blue orbs wild with terror. For a moment, he didn't seem to see her, lost in whatever horror his mind had conjured. Then slowly, his gaze focused. Mrs. Boone, I'm here. Without warning, Milo threw his arms around her neck, sobbing into her shoulder. Clara held him rocking gently while Ben and Harris watched with expressions of wonder. How long had it been since anyone had comforted them through their nightmares? I saw them, Milo whispered. The children who didn't get out. They were calling for help, but nobody could hear them. That wasn't your fault, Clara said firmly. You tried to warn them. Nobody ever listens, Milo said, his voice breaking. I tell them things, and they think I'm crazy or possessed or broken, and then bad things happen and they blame me for knowing. Clara pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. I'm listening. If you know something, if you see something, you tell me. I promise I'll listen. Milo searched her face, then nodded slowly. You have a good heart, he said, but it's been frozen. Like our pond in winter, everything good still there, just trapped under ice. Maybe you 3 can help me thaw it out, Clara said. We'll try, Ben said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken without suspicion or defensiveness in his voice. Clara stayed with them until Milo fell back asleep, his hand clutched in hers. Harris curled protectively around his younger brother, while Ben kept watch, unable or unwilling to fully surrender to sleep. You should rest, Clara told him. I'll sit here for a while. You don't have to. I want to, she said, and meant it. She sat in the chair by the window, watching over these 3 boys who had somehow impossibly become hers in the space of a single day. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across their faces, making them look even younger than they were. She thought about Samuel, about the children they'd dreamed of having, about the nursery they'd planned in loving detail but never got to use. She thought about the years of loneliness, the weight of grief that had nearly crushed her. And she thought about Milo's words that God had told him she would come, that she would be sad, but she would take them home. Maybe it wasn't God. Maybe it was just a frightened child's desperate hope. But sitting there in the moonlight, listening to the boys' breathing slowly synchronize in sleep, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness, but Clara was already awake, standing at her bedroom window, watching the first hints of light creep across the cornfields. She'd barely slept, her mind too full of the responsibilities she'd taken on her ears, attuned to every sound from the boys' room. Twice more during the night she'd heard Milo whimper in his sleep, but each time either Ben or Harris had soothed him before she could intervene. She dressed quietly in her everyday work dress, a faded blue cotton that Samuel had always said brought out her eyes, and made her way downstairs to start breakfast. The house felt different already, warmer somehow, as if the very walls had absorbed the presence of the children and come alive again. She was stirring pancake batter when she heard bare feet on the stairs. Ben appeared in the doorway, fully dressed in Samuel's old clothes, his dark hair still mussed from sleep. "You're up early," Clara observed. "Old habit," Ben said, hovering uncertainly at the threshold. "At the orphanage, the early risers got first pick at breakfast. Sometimes the only pick." "Well, there's plenty here for everyone. No need to compete," Clara gestured to the table. "Coffee." Ben's eyes widened slightly. "We're allowed coffee." "You're old enough, I'd say. 12, 13. Ben corrected, then looked like he regretted sharing even that small detail. Clara poured him a cup, adding a generous amount of cream and sugar without asking. Ben wrapped his hands around the warm mug like it was something precious. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said, flipping pancakes on the griddle. Ben tensed but nodded. "That man Crane. He seemed to know you boys already. This wasn't the first time he'd tried to sell you, was it?" Ben was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "He's been following us for years. Every time we'd get placed somewhere new, he'd show up eventually. Tell the foster family's stories about us, how I was violent, how Harris was a thief, how Milo was possessed, plant seeds of doubt. Then when something went wrong, and something always went wrong, he'd be there with his wagon and his papers offering to take us off their hands. But why? What does he gain from it? Money mostly, but I think he enjoys it too. The power. Making us feel like we're nothing." Ben's knuckles were white around the mug. "He told me once that some folks are just born to be owned, that fighting it only makes things worse." Clara set down her spatula and turned to face him fully. "He was wrong. Nobody owns you. Not him, not me, not anyone. You're here because I invited you and you accepted. If you ever want to leave, we don't—" Ben interrupted quickly. "I mean, Milo says, he says this is where we're supposed to be." Before Clara could respond, Harris and Milo tumbled into the kitchen. Milo riding piggyback again, both of them giggling until they saw Ben's serious expression. "Are we in trouble?" Harris asked immediately. "No," Clara assured them. "Just talking. Pancakes." Milo's face lit up. "Real pancakes with syrup. Real everything," Clara promised, lifting him off Harris's back and setting him in a chair. "Though after breakfast we need to talk about chores and responsibilities. This is a working farm." "We're good with animals," Harris offered eagerly. "At the Carsons' farm I took care of the chickens and goats." "And I can milk cows," Milo added. "My hands are small but strong." "I can do whatever needs doing," Ben said simply. After they'd demolished a stack of pancakes that would have fed Clara for 3 days, she took them on a proper tour of the farm. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn dew still clinging to the grass. The boys followed her like ducklings, Milo sometimes running ahead to investigate something before Harris called him back. She showed them the chicken coop first, where her dozen hens were already scratching and pecking at the ground. Milo immediately crouched down, making soft clucking sounds that had the boldest hen approaching him curiously. "They like him," Clara said, surprised. "Animals always like Milo," Harris explained. "It's like they know he won't hurt them." Next was the barn, where her milk cow Gertie lowed a greeting. The barn also housed Samuel's old plow horse Magnus, who was getting too old for heavy work, but whom Clara couldn't bear to sell. "He's beautiful," Ben said, approaching the horse, slowly letting Magnus smell his hand before stroking the gray muzzle. "Samuel loved that horse," Clara said, "raised him from a colt." They continued to the pig pen, the vegetable garden, the tool shed, and finally the cornfields that stretched for acres in neat rows. The boys listened attentively as Clara explained the daily routines, feeding the animals, collecting eggs, milking Gertie, watering the garden. "It's a lot of work for one person," Harris observed. "It has been," Clara admitted. "I've let some things slide since Samuel died. The back field hasn't been planted in 2 years and the fence needs mending in several places." "We can fix it," Ben said with quiet confidence. "We're good at fixing things." They spent the morning working together, falling into a rhythm with surprising ease. Ben took charge of the heavier tasks without being asked, showing a natural leadership that belied his years. Harris proved to have a gentle touch with the animals, coaxing even the most skittish chickens to let him collect their eggs. And Milo seemed to be everywhere at once, his high voice calling out observations and questions that made Clara realize how long it had been since she'd really looked at her own farm. "Mrs. Boone? Why does that scarecrow have a hole in his chest?" "Mrs. Boone, there's a cat in the barn loft. Can we keep her?" "Mrs. Boone, the sunflowers by the fence are taller than me." Around midday, as the sun climbed high and the boys' enthusiasm began to flag, Clara called them in for lunch. They sat around the kitchen table, dirt under their fingernails, and sweat on their brows, looking more like farm children than the scared orphans she'd brought home yesterday. "This afternoon," Clara said, passing out sandwiches, "we need to go back to town." The boys froze sandwiches halfway to their mouths. "You're not taking us back?" Ben said, not a question, but a statement edged with steel. "Of course not," Clara said quickly. "But you need proper clothes that fit and shoes that aren't falling apart, and I need to register you with the county, make everything official." "Official how?" Harris asked suspiciously. "I want to be your legal guardian. That way Crane or anyone else can't try to claim you." The boys exchanged their silent looks again. Finally, Milo spoke up. "What if they say no? What if they say you can't keep us?" Clara reached across the table and took his small hand. "Then we'll find another way. But I'm not giving you up without a fight." The trip to town that afternoon was tense. The boys sat rigid in the wagon, Milo pressed between his brothers like they were shielding him. As they rolled down Main Street, Clara could feel the stairs, hear the whispers starting up again. Their first stop was Henderson's General Store. Mrs. Henderson was behind the counter, and her face went through a series of expressions when she saw them, surprised curiosity and something that might have been disapproval. "Clara," she said carefully, "and these must be the boys everyone's talking about." "Ben Harris and Milo," Clara said firmly. "They need clothes and shoes, Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly as she took in their ill-fitting clothes and worn shoes. "Of course. Let me get my measuring tape." For the next hour, she fitted the boys with sturdy work clothes, school clothes, and proper shoes. Milo was enchanted by a blue shirt that matched his eyes, while Harris kept gravitating toward anything green. Ben chose practical browns and grays, though Clara insisted on one nice white shirt for Sundays. "That's too much," Ben whispered when he saw the pile of goods. "It's exactly enough," Clara countered. As Mrs. Henderson tallied the purchase, the bell over the door chimed. Clara's stomach dropped as Mayor Blackwood entered, his expression grave. "Mrs. Boone," he said formally, "I heard you were in town. We need to discuss yesterday's transaction." "What's to discuss?" Clara asked, though her hands trembled slightly as she counted out bills for Mrs. Henderson. "There are concerns," the mayor said, glancing at the boys, "about the propriety of an unmarried woman taking in 3 young boys, about the suspicious circumstances of how the smallest one knew your name. Some folks are saying it's unnatural." "Some folks should mind their own business," Clara said sharply. "Perhaps, but as mayor I have to consider the welfare of these children." "Their welfare," Clara's voice rose. "Where was concern for their welfare when that man was selling them like cattle in the town square? Where was it when nobody else stepped forward to help them?" The mayor had the grace to look ashamed, That's exactly why I'm here, actually. Judge Morrison wants to see you, all of you, to make things official, as you say. Clara's heart raced. This could go either way. The judge could formalize her guardianship, or he could take the boys away. Now, if you're willing, Clara looked at the boys. Ben's jaw was set. Harris had his fists clenched, and Milo was humming nervously that same mysterious tune. We're willing. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building that smelled of old paper and lemon oil. Judge Morrison's office was on the 2nd floor, his desk positioned beneath a portrait of President Lincoln. The judge himself was a thin man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Sit, please, he said, gesturing to chairs. There weren't enough, so Milo ended up on Clara's lap, while Ben and Harris flanked them protectively. Now then, the judge began opening a folder. Mr. Crane left some interesting paperwork. Claims these boys are chronic runaways, troubled and possibly dangerous. Says he was doing the county a service by finding them placement. Crane is a liar, Ben said flatly. That may be, the judge said mildly. But I need to hear your side of things. Let's start with names and ages. Ben, 13. Harris, 10. Milo, the youngest whispered, I'm 7 3/4. Last names. We don't know, Ben admitted. I had one once, but the orphanage said it didn't matter anymore. Harris never knew his, and Milo was left as a baby with just his first name pinned to his blanket. The judge made notes. How long have you been together? 5 years, Harris said. Ben found me hiding in the orphanage cellar my first night. I was scared, and he gave me half his blanket. And Milo? Always, Ben said. He's been ours since he was a baby. I see, the judge turned to Clara. Mrs. Boone, you're a widow with no children of your own. What makes you think you can handle 3 boys? Clara straightened her spine. What makes anyone think they can handle children? You learn as you go. What I can tell you is that I have a stable home, a working farm, and enough love to go around. More importantly, I want them. Not as workers, not as charity cases, but as family. And the incident yesterday, the boy knowing your name. Before Clara could answer, Milo spoke up. I know things sometimes. I don't know how. I knew Mrs. Boone would save us. I knew the orphanage would burn. I know you have a pain in your left knee that gets worse when it rains. The judge's eyebrows shot up. He did indeed have chronic knee pain, though he'd told no one but his wife. That's quite a gift, he said carefully. People usually call it something else, Milo said sadly. People are often afraid of what they don't understand, the judge replied. He studied them all for a long moment. I'm going to grant temporary guardianship to Mrs. Boone. 6 months. There will be check-ins from the county, and if there are any problems... There won't be, Clara said firmly. I hope not, because Mr. Crane has made it clear he's willing to take the boys back if this arrangement fails. Over my dead body, Clara muttered. The judge's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Now there's the matter of education. These boys need to be in school. School? Harris looked panicked. We can read a little, but... Then it's time you learned properly, Clara said. Education is important. They left the courthouse with official papers making Clara the boys' temporary guardian. The word temporary sat like a stone in her stomach, but it was better than nothing. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Milo tugged on Clara's dress. Mrs. Boone, there's a man watching us. Clara turned to see a figure in a dark coat standing in the shadow of the hotel across the street. Even from a distance, she recognized Crane's slouching posture. He touched the brim of his hat mockingly and disappeared into the alley. Don't worry about him, Clara said, though her own heart was racing. He can't touch you now. But as they drove home, she noticed Ben kept looking back and Harris had positioned himself to shield Milo from view. These boys had learned to be afraid, and a piece of paper from a judge might not be enough to undo that fear. That evening, after dinner and chores, Clara sat the boys down in the parlor, a room she hadn't used since Samuel's funeral. Tomorrow is Sunday, she said. I usually go to church. You don't have to come if you don't want to, but we'll come, Ben said quickly. We should be seen together, as a family. The word hung in the air, delicate as spun glass. Is that what we are? Harris asked quietly. A family. Clara looked at these three boys who had crashed into her life just yesterday but already felt essential to it. I'd like us to be, if you're willing. Milo climbed into her lap, something he'd started doing without asking, as natural as breathing. Families are people who choose each other right. We choose you, Mrs. Boone. And I choose you, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. All three of you. That night, as Clara was banking the fire in the kitchen stove, she heard music. Not Milo's usual humming, but actual singing, Harris's clear voice, carrying an old hymn she recognized from her childhood. She followed the sound upstairs and found all three boys in their room, Harris singing while Ben helped Milo practice writing his letters on a slate Clara had found in the attic. She stood in the doorway, unnoticed, watching them. This was what she'd dreamed of all those years, not the boys themselves perhaps, but this scene. Children in this house filling it with music and purpose and life. Mrs. Boone, Milo had spotted her. Will you teach me to write your name? Clara entered the room and knelt beside him. Of course. But you already know it, don't you? I know how to say it, Milo said, but I want to know how to write it too, so I never forget. You won't forget, Clara assured him, guiding his small hand. None of us will forget. Later, after the boys were asleep, Clara stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the moonlit farm. Somewhere out there, she knew Crane was lurking, waiting for her to fail. The town was watching too, expecting these boys to prove too much for a lonely widow to handle. But they didn't know what she knew. They didn't see how Ben had already started making a list of farm repairs, approaching the work with an intelligence and dedication beyond his years. They didn't see Harris's gentleness with the animals, or his beautiful singing voice that could probably charm angels. They didn't see Milo's strange gift, which Clara was beginning to understand wasn't a curse, but perhaps a kind of blessing, a way of knowing when help was needed. And they didn't know how empty her life had been before yesterday, how close she'd come to simply fading away like a ghost in her own home. The next morning, Sunday, dawned bright and clear. Clara woke to the sound of whispered arguments from the boys' room. The shirt's too tight. It's supposed to fit like that. It's church clothes. Milo, stop wiggling. She smiled and rose to help them prepare. She found them in various states of dress, Ben trying to comb Milo's unruly hair, while Harris struggled with his collar buttons. Here, Claire said, taking over. She fixed Harris's collar, smoothed down Milo's cowlick, and straightened Ben's tie. You all look very handsome. Do we have to go? Harris asked nervously. Everyone will stare. Let them stare, Clara said. We have nothing to be ashamed of. But when they arrived at the small white church at the center of town, Clara felt her own courage falter. It seemed the entire congregation had turned to watch them enter. Whispers followed them down the aisle like rustling leaves. Is that them? The widow and those orphan boys. I heard the little one is touched. Such a scandal. Clara kept her head high, her hand on Milo's shoulder, Ben and Harris close behind. They took a pew near the back, and Clara was grateful when old Mrs. Winters, who sat in front of them, turned around with a warm smile. Good to see you, Clara dear, and these must be your boys. Your boys. Two simple words that made Clara's heart swell. Reverend Phillips took the pulpit, and Clara wondered if he would address their presence. He was Martha's husband, and Martha had made her disapproval clear yesterday. But when he began to speak, his words surprised her. Today's scripture comes from James chapter 1, verse 27. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. He looked directly at Clara as he continued. Sometimes God calls us to do difficult things, to open our homes and our hearts when it would be easier to keep them closed, to see Christ in the least of these and to act accordingly. Beside her, Milo had started humming again, so quietly only she could hear. But there was something different about it. This time, she recognized the melody. It was the hymn they were about to sing, though the hymn number hadn't been announced yet. Throughout the service, Clara noticed things. How Ben automatically helped Milo find the right page in the hymnal. How Harris shared his offering penny with Milo when the younger boy realized he had nothing to put in the plate. How all three boys sat straighter when Reverend Philip spoke about family being more than blood. After the service, as they filed out, several congregation members made a point of greeting them. Not everyone, some still kept their distance, whispering behind their hands. But enough people offered kind words and welcoming smiles that Clara felt hope kindling in her chest. Mrs. Boone. It was Dr. Whitman approaching with his wife. I wanted to apologize for not speaking up yesterday at the incident. It was cowardly of me. There's nothing to apologize for, Clara said. There is, say, he insisted. He turned to the boys. If any of you ever need medical attention, you come to me, understood, no charge. That's very kind, Clara said, touched. It's the least I can do. He lowered his voice. And Mrs. Boone, if Crane gives you any trouble, you let me know. I've been asking around about him. He's not as legally protected as he thinks he is. As they walked back to the wagon, Milo slipped his hand into Clara's. Some of them are scared of us, he said matter-of-factly. Are you scared of them? Clara asked. Milo considered this. No, they're just people. Scared people sometimes do mean things, but they're still just people. That's a very mature way of looking at it. Ben taught me that, Milo said, looking up at his oldest brother with adoration. The ride home was quieter than the ride to church, each of them lost in their own thoughts. As the farmhouse came into view, Clara noticed something different. There was a figure sitting on the porch steps. Ben tensed. It's him. It's Crane. Clara's blood turned cold, but she kept her voice steady. He has no power here. This is our home. She pulled the wagon up to the house, and Crane stood, his smile as oily as ever. Mrs. Boone, boys, pleasant morning at church. What do you want? Clara asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Just checking on my investment, Crane said, making sure these boys are being properly cared for. They're not your investment, Clara said. I have legal guardianship. Temporary guardianship, Crane corrected. 6 months is a long time. A lot can happen in 6 months. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Crane's eyes glittered. Boys like these, with their histories, their peculiarities, they tend to cause trouble. Fires start. Things go missing. People get hurt. Nothing like that will happen here, Ben said, his voice hard. Crane laughed. Oh, Ben, still trying to be the protector you couldn't protect them before. What makes you think this time will be different? Because this time they have me, Clara said, stepping between Crane and the boys. And I don't scare easily. We'll see about that. Crane tipped his hat. I'll be around Mrs. Boone, watching, waiting. These boys belong to me, and sooner or later they always come back. He sauntered off down the road, whistling tunelessly. Clara watched until he was out of sight, then turned to find all three boys huddled together, Milo crying silently. Hey, she said softly, kneeling down to their level. He's gone. He can't hurt you. He burned the orphanage, Harris whispered. We can't prove it, but he did. What if he burns your house? What if he hurts you because of us? Clara gathered all three boys into her arms, a tangle of limbs and fears and desperate hope. Then we'll face it together. That's what families do. You don't understand, Ben said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Everyone who tries to help us gets hurt. It's like we're cursed. I don't believe in curses, Clara said firmly. I believe in choices, and I choose you. Every day, no matter what comes, I choose you. That evening, as Clara prepared dinner, she found herself humming. It took her a moment to realize it was Milo's tune, that mysterious melody he was always humming. She still didn't know where it came from, but it had worked its way into her head like a prayer or a promise. You know it too, Milo said from the doorway, his eyes wide with wonder. I guess I do, Clara said. You've been humming it so much it's stuck. No, Milo said seriously. You've always known it. You just forgot. Like you forgot how to be happy, but you're remembering now. Before Clara could ask what he meant, Harris called from upstairs something about Ben getting his hand stuck trying to fix the loose floorboard in their room. She hurried to help, and in the chaos of freeing Ben and bandaging his scraped knuckles, Milo's strange words were temporarily forgotten. But that night, as she lay in bed listening to the old house settle around her, Clara found herself thinking about memory and forgetting about the things we lose and the things that find us. She thought about Milo knowing her name about him, saying God told him she would come. Was it possible that some connections existed before we were aware of them, that some families were meant to find each other even if it took tragedy and loneliness, and a man selling children like cattle to bring them together? From down the hall, she heard Ben's voice, low and soothing, telling his brothers a story. She couldn't make out all the words, but she caught fragments: a brave knight, a magic sword, 3 brothers who could never be separated. Harris occasionally interrupted with questions, and Milo's giggles punctuated the tale like music. This was her family now, not the one she'd planned or prayed for, but perhaps the one she needed, the one that needed her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. School would start soon, and she'd have to navigate the boys' education, their trauma, their fears. Crane would be watching, waiting for them to fail. The town would be judging, expecting her to prove she could handle this unexpected responsibility. But tonight in this house that had been silent for so long, there was storytelling and laughter. There was life. And that was enough. Clara closed her eyes and for the first time in 3 years fell asleep without crying. Instead, she found herself humming that tune, Milo's tune, their tune now, and dreaming of sunflowers taller than children and a future bright with possibility. The schoolhouse bell rang across the valley on Monday morning, its bronze voice carrying through the September air like a summons Clara had been dreading. She stood at the kitchen window watching Ben struggle with Milo's collar, while Harris packed and repacked his slate and primer, checking 3 times to make sure he had everything. "We don't have to go," Ben said, for the 5th time since breakfast. "We can learn here. You can teach us." "You need proper education," Clara said firmly, though her heart ached at the fear in his voice. "Besides, the law requires it. Judge Morrison was clear about that." What she didn't say was that the school board had already sent a letter formally requesting the boys' attendance and reminding her that failure to comply could affect her guardianship. The pristine white envelope had arrived Saturday afternoon, delivered by a nervous-looking courier who wouldn't meet her eyes. "The other children will hate us," Harris said quietly, his hand stilling on his books. "They always do." "You don't know that," Clara said, though she suspected he might be right. Children could be cruel, especially to outsiders, and her boys were definitely that. Milo hadn't said anything all morning, which worried her more than complaints would have. He sat at the table tracing patterns in the wood grain with his finger humming that tune of his so quietly she could barely hear it. Milo. Clara knelt beside his chair. "What is it?" "Something bad is going to happen today," he whispered. "Not to us, but because of us. I can feel it building like storm clouds." Clara's blood chilled, but she kept her voice steady. "Can you tell what it is?" Milo shook his head, his pale eyes troubled. "Just darkness, and anger, and someone getting hurt." Ben and Harris exchanged worried glances. They'd learned to trust Milo's feelings, even when they couldn't understand them. "Maybe we should stay home," Claire said, second-guessing herself. "Just today." "No," Ben said, suddenly his jaw setting in that determined way she was beginning to recognize. "If we hide, Crane wins. He wants us to be afraid. He wants us to fail." He looked at his brothers. "We go to school. We face whatever comes, together." The walk to town took 40 minutes on foot, the wagon being needed for farm work later. Clara had offered to drive them, but Ben insisted they could manage. She watched them disappear down the road. Milo between his brothers, their new clothes making them look like any other farm children heading to school. Only the way they walked, alert, defensive, ready to run, betrayed their difference. Clara tried to focus on her morning chores, but her mind kept wandering to the schoolhouse. She milked Gertie with mechanical movements, gathered eggs without counting them, and found herself standing in the garden with no memory of walking there. It was barely past noon when she saw them coming back up the road. Her heart sank. Harris was carrying Milo, who appeared to be unconscious, while Ben had a bloody nose and a torn shirt. Clara ran to meet them, her skirts flying. What happened? "Tommy Morrison and his friends," Harris gasped, struggling under Milo's weight. Clara took the little boy from him, alarmed at how cold he felt. "They cornered us at recess," Ben explained as they hurried toward the house. Started saying things about Milo being possessed, about us being cursed. Milo tried to walk away, but Tommy grabbed him, said his father, the judge, should have us all locked up in an asylum. Milo started shaking, Harris continued, not like he was scared, like something was happening inside him. His eyes rolled back and he started speaking, but it wasn't his voice. It was deeper, older. He said Tommy's baby sister was sick, that she had a fever and couldn't breathe, that she needed the doctor right now or she would die. Clara laid Milo on the sofa in the parlor, feeling his forehead. He was ice cold, but breathing normally. Tommy hit him, Ben said, fury in his voice. Called him a devil child and hit him hard enough to knock him down. Milo's head hit the schoolhouse steps. I fought them off, Harris added, and Clara noticed his knuckles were scraped and bloody. Ben too, but then Miss Patterson came out and blamed us for starting trouble, sent us home and said not to come back until we could behave properly. Clara's anger burned hot, but she pushed it aside. Milo was stirring his eyelids, fluttering. Mrs. Boone, his voice was thin as paper. Did they listen about the baby? What baby, sweetheart? Judge Morrison's baby. Sarah, she's dying. Tears leaked from his closed eyes. The scarlet fever, her throat's closing up. They need to do something now. Clara felt her blood turn cold. Harris, run to Dr. Whitman. Tell him what Milo said about the Morrison baby. Go! Harris took off like a shot. Clara turned to Ben. Get me cold cloths for his head, and the laudanum from the medicine cabinet, just a few drops in water. As Ben ran to comply, Clara cradled Milo's head in her lap, smoothing his hair. The boy was trembling now, his skin slowly warming, but still too pale. It hurts, Milo whimpered. When I know things, it hurts, like lightning in my head. Shh, Clara soothed. You're safe now. They'll blame us if she dies, Milo said. They'll say I cursed her. They always blame us. Ben returned with the cloths and medicine. Clara gave Milo tiny sips, just enough to ease his pain. Within minutes, the trembling stopped and some color returned to his cheeks. They waited in tense silence for Harris to return. When he finally burst through the door an hour later, he was panting hard. Dr. Whitman went straight to the Morrisons. The baby was burning with fever, just like Milo said. Her throat was so swollen she could barely breathe. The doctor did something, cut her throat to help her breathe, he said. She's alive. She might make it. Clara felt the tension drain from her shoulders. Thank God. There's more, Harris said. Judge Morrison wants to see you, all of us, tomorrow morning. That night, none of them slept well. Clara heard the boys talking in low voices, Ben trying to reassure his brothers while clearly terrified himself. She wanted to comfort them, but sensed they needed this time together to process what had happened in their own way. She was making breakfast when she heard horses approaching. Looking out, she saw not just Judge Morrison, but Dr. Whitman, Reverend Phillips, and Mayor Blackwood. Her stomach clenched. Boys, she called upstairs, we have visitors. They came down slowly, Milo clinging to Ben's hand. They stood behind Clara as she opened the door, a united front against whatever was coming. Mrs. Boone, Judge Morrison said. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. May we come in? Clara stepped aside, gesturing them to the parlor. The men filed in, their faces grave. Judge Morrison looked directly at Milo. You saved my daughter's life, he said simply. If we'd waited even another hour, Dr. Whitman says she would have suffocated. I'm sorry about Tommy hitting you, the judge continued. He's been disciplined. It won't happen again. With respect, Judge, Clara said coolly, your son attacked a 7-year-old child for trying to help. An apology hardly seems sufficient. You're right, the judge admitted, which is why we're here. The town council met in emergency session this morning. There are concerns about the boys, about Milo in particular. You want to take them away, Clara said flatly. No, Reverend Phillips interjected. We want to understand. This gift of Milo's, it's not a gift, Milo said quietly. It's just something that happens. I don't control it. How long have you been able to do this? Dr. Whitman asked, his tone clinical but not unkind. Milo looked at Ben, who nodded permission. Always, since I can remember. I knew when the milk was poisoned at the Garrett house. I knew when the bridge would collapse outside Jefferson City. I knew Mrs. Boone would come for us. And you're never wrong, Mayor Blackwood asked skeptically. Sometimes I don't understand what I'm seeing, Milo admitted. Once I saw a yellow bird in winter and didn't know it meant fever until after. But the knowing itself is always true. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Can you see things about all of us? Milo studied each man in turn. You're afraid your wife won't forgive you for not believing sooner, he told the judge. He looked at the doctor. Dream about the war, still about the men you couldn't save. Reverend Phillips wonders if God really hears his prayers, or if he's just talking to himself. And Mayor Blackwood, Milo tilted his head. You have a letter in your pocket from your son in California. You haven't opened it because you're afraid it's bad news. It's not. He's coming home for Christmas. The mayor's hand went automatically to his pocket, his face pale. How could you possibly? I don't know, Milo said simply. I just do. The men exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, Judge Morrison spoke. We need to decide what to do about this. The town is already talking. Some people are calling it witchcraft. It's not witchcraft, Clara said fiercely. He's just a little boy with an unusual ability. An ability that terrifies people, the mayor pointed out. Only because they don't understand it, Dr. Whitman said thoughtfully. I've read about such cases in medical journals. Some call it second sight or clairvoyance. There's no scientific explanation, but that doesn't make it evil. What do you propose? Clara asked. The men looked at each other. Reverend Phillips cleared his throat. Milo needs to return to school. If we keep him hidden, it will only fuel more rumors, but perhaps we could find a way to present his ability in a less threatening light. You mean lie about it, Ben said flatly. I mean frame it differently, the Reverend corrected. Call it intuition. Say he's uncommonly perceptive. Don't deny it, but don't emphasize it either. And if something like yesterday happens again, Clara asked, if he knows something that could save a life, then he tells an adult quietly, Judge Morrison said. Not in front of other children. We can manage this if we're careful. Clara looked at her boys. Ben's face was skeptical. Harris looked worried, and Milo seemed tired beyond his years. What do you think? She asked them. We've hidden before, Ben said. It never works forever, but sometimes it's enough to get by. I can try, Milo said quietly. I can try to be more careful. And so it was decided. The boys would return to school the next day with the judge's personal assurance of their safety. The men left with handshakes and promises of support that Clara only half believed. That evening, as she tucked the boys into bed, Milo caught her hand. Mrs. Boone, what I see about you, it's changing. What do you mean? When I first saw you, you were all gray inside like winter. Now there's color coming back, green like spring, gold like sunshine. He smiled sleepily. We did that. We brought your colors back. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You did indeed. The return to school was tense but uneventful. Tommy Morrison kept his distance, sporting a spectacular black eye that Harris claimed no knowledge of despite his still bruised knuckles. Miss Patterson was stiffly professional, clearly uncomfortable, but following the judge's directive to treat the boys fairly. For a week, things seemed to settle into a routine. The boys did their chores before school, walked to town, attended classes, and came home to help with afternoon farm work. Milo was quiet in class. Ben excelled at arithmetic, and Harris showed a surprising talent for reading aloud. Clara began to hope they'd found their rhythm, their place in this small town's careful order. She should have known better. It was a Thursday afternoon when she saw the smoke, black and thick, rising from the direction of town. Her first thought was for the boys, were they safe? School should have let out an hour ago, but they weren't home yet. She was hitching Magnus to the wagon when she saw them running up the road. All three were covered in soot, their clothes singed. What happened? She called, running to meet them. The schoolhouse, Ben gasped. It caught fire during last period. Is everyone all right? Everyone got out, Harris said. But Milo, I knew it was going to happen. Milo interrupted, his voice miserable. I felt it this morning, but I didn't say anything because I promised to be careful. And then I smelled the smoke before anyone else, and I yelled and everyone got out. But now they're saying he started it, Ben finished grimly, that he knew because he planned it. Clara's blood boiled. That's absurd. You were in class when it started. Doesn't matter, Harris said bitterly. We're the strangers, the orphans, the cursed ones. Of course they blame us. Before Clara could respond, she heard horses approaching. A lot of horses. She pushed the boys behind her as a group of men rode up, led by Cyrus McKenna, the farm owner who'd tried to buy Ben that first day. Mrs. Boone, McKenna said, not bothering to dismount. We need to discuss these boys. There's nothing to discuss, Clara said firmly. The schoolhouse is gone, McKenna said. Burned to the ground. And your boy knew it was going to happen. He helped save everyone, or he set it up to look like a hero, someone called from the back of the group. That's enough, a new voice commanded. Crane emerged from behind the riders, his smile triumphant. Gentlemen, I tried to warn you. These boys bring destruction wherever they go. The orphanage in Jefferson City, now your schoolhouse. What's next? Your homes, your businesses. You burned that orphanage, Ben shouted. We all know you did. Crane's smile widened. Prove it, boy. Mrs. Boone has legal guardianship, Dr. Whitman said, pushing through the crowd. Clara hadn't even noticed him arrive. You can't just take them. Temporary guardianship, Crane corrected. Subject to review if the children prove dangerous to the community. I'd say burning down the schoolhouse qualifies. We didn't burn anything, Harris protested. The fire started in the storage room, McKenna said, where the lamp oil is kept. Someone knocked over a lamp. Maybe accidentally, maybe not. I was in the front row, Milo said quietly. Miss Patterson can tell you. I never went near the storage room. Miss Patterson is unconscious, Dr. Whitman said. Smoke inhalation. She can't tell us anything right now. Clara felt the situation spiraling out of control. These men were angry, frightened, looking for someone to blame, and her boys were perfect scapegoats. You have no proof, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. No evidence except prejudice and fear. We have a pattern, Crane said smoothly. Everywhere these boys go, disaster follows. How many coincidences before you admit the truth? The truth, Judge Morrison's voice cut through the crowd as he approached on foot, is that the fire was caused by a faulty chimney flue. I've just come from examining the scene with the fire brigade. The crowd fell silent. Crane's smile faltered. The chimney had been damaged in last month's storm, the judge continued. The school board had been notified, but hadn't arranged repairs yet. Sparks from the chimney ignited papers in the storage room. It was an accident, pure and simple. But the boy knew, McKenna started. The boy has unusual intuition, the judge said firmly, which saved lives today, including my son's. He looked at Tommy, who stood at the edge of the crowd looking ashamed. If Milo hadn't raised the alarm when he did, children would have died. The crowd began to disperse, muttering. Some looked relieved, others still suspicious. Crane lingered, his eyes narrowed. This isn't over, he said quietly to Clara. These boys are trouble and everyone knows it. Sooner or later something will happen that can't be explained away. And when it does, I'll be waiting. He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Clara and her boys standing in the dusty road. Thank you, Clara said to Judge Morrison. The judge looked tired. I told the truth, nothing more. But Mrs. Boone, this situation is becoming untenable. Half the town thinks Milo is some kind of prophet. The other half thinks he's possessed. Neither is good for the boy or for community stability. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just observing that sometimes unusual children do better in places where unusual is more accepted. Cities, perhaps? Or specialized schools. You want us to leave? I want what's best for everyone, the judge said carefully, including those boys. That night, Clara found herself unable to sleep. She walked through the house, checking on the boys repeatedly. They slept fitfully, Milo whimpering in his dreams while Ben and Harris took turns soothing him. She stood at her bedroom window looking out at the farm bathed in moonlight. This was her home, Samuel's home. She'd thought it would be the boys' home too. But perhaps the judge was right. Perhaps they needed somewhere else, somewhere Milo's gift wouldn't mark him as either saint or demon. But where would they go and how she had the farm but little money? Starting over somewhere else seemed impossible. A movement in the yard caught her eye, a figure near the barn barely visible in the shadows. Her blood ran cold. Craned. She grabbed Samuel's rifle from above the fireplace and slipped out the back door, moving as quietly as she could. The figure was definitely Crane, and he was doing something near the barn door. "Stop right there," she said, leveling the rifle at him. Crane turned slowly, his hands raised mockingly. Now, Mrs. Boone, no need for violence. You're trespassing. I'm checking on my investment, making sure those boys are being properly cared for." At midnight, sneaking around my barn, Crane's smile was visible even in the darkness. "You can't protect them forever. You're one woman alone with no family, no real support. How long before the strain breaks you? How long before you realize you're in over your head? Get off my property." "Gladly. But think about what I'm offering. I'll take the boys off your hands, no questions asked. You can go back to your quiet life, your grief, your solitude. No more trouble, no more fear, no more judgment from the town." "They're not for sale." "Everything's for sale, Mrs. Boone. It's just a matter of price. What's yours? What would it take for you to admit you made a mistake?" Clara cocked the rifle. "Leave, now. And if I catch you on my property again, I'll shoot first and ask questions later." Crane backed away, hands still raised. "You'll regret this. When things get worse, and they will get worse, remember that you had a chance to end it peacefully." She watched him disappear into the darkness, then checked the barn. She found nothing obvious, but a feeling of unease settled in her stomach. What had he been doing? She was about to go back inside when she heard it, Milo's voice, high and frightened. "Fire, fire!" Clara ran toward the house, then realized the sound was coming from behind her. She turned to see flames licking at the base of the barn door. "No!" She ran back, throwing open the barn door. The flames were just starting to spread along the hay bales Crane must have soaked with lamp oil. Magnus was whinnying in terror, Gertie lowing frantically. Clara grabbed a horse blanket and began beating at the flames while shouting for the boys. They came running, Ben with a bucket of water from the kitchen, Harris with another blanket, Milo leading Magnus out of his stall. They fought the fire together, Clara and Ben dousing flames while Harris led the animals to safety. Milo ran back and forth with buckets, his small form silhouetted against the orange glow. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before they had the fire under control. The barn door was charred, several hay bales destroyed, but the structure stood intact. They collapsed in the yard, breathing hard, covered in soot and sweat. Clara pulled all three boys against her, feeling them trembling. "He did this," Ben said. "Crane did this." "I know. We can't prove it," Harris said bitterly. "Just like we can't prove he burned the orphanage." "Maybe not," Clara said. "But Judge Morrison will hear about this. Dr. Whitman, too. They're starting to see Crane for what he is." "It doesn't matter," Milo said quietly. "He won't stop. Not until he has us back, or we're dead." The starkness of the statement from such a young child was chilling, but Clara knew he was right. This was no longer about legal guardianship or community acceptance. This was about survival. "Then we have to be stronger than him," she said. "Smarter. We protect each other no matter what." "How, Tish?" Ben asked. "We're just kids, and you're just a woman." Clara smiled grimly. "Maybe, but I'm a woman who survived losing everything I loved. I'm a woman who chose you three when everyone said I was crazy. And I'm a woman who will not let that man or anyone else hurt my family." "Family," Harris repeated softly like he was tasting the word. "Family," Clara confirmed. "And families fight for each other." They spent the rest of the night in the kitchen, too wired to sleep. Clara made hot chocolate while the boys took turns keeping watch at the windows. As dawn broke, they were still there, huddled together around the table, planning their next move. "We need allies," Ben said, showing a strategic mind beyond his years. "Dr. Whitman seems sympathetic. Maybe Reverend Phillips, too." "The judge feels guilty about Tommy hitting Milo," Harris added. "We could use that." "And I could try to see more," Milo offered. "About Crane, about what he's planning." "No," Clara said firmly. "Your gift hurts you. I won't have you suffering to gather information. But if it helps, we'll find another way." Clara squeezed his hand. We always do. A knock at the door made them all freeze. Claire grabbed the rifle again, motioning for the boys to stay back. Mrs. Boone, it was Dr. Whitman's voice. I heard there was trouble last night. Claire opened the door cautiously. The doctor stood there with Judge Morrison and, surprisingly, Mrs. Winters from church. May we come in? The judge asked. Claire stepped aside, still wary. The three visitors entered, taking in the boys' soot-covered faces and exhausted eyes. We saw the damage to your barn, Dr. Whitman said. Crane was seen leaving town at dawn, riding hard toward Jefferson City. Running away? Harris asked hopefully. More likely getting reinforcements, the judge said grimly. I've been investigating him. He has connections to an organization that trades in displaced children. Not quite slavery, but close enough. Then stop him, Clara said. I'm trying, but he's careful. Never quite crosses the legal line. The judge rubbed his tired eyes. However, I can offer you something. Official adoption papers. If you legally adopt the boys, it becomes much harder for Crane or anyone else to take them. Clara's heart leaped. You can do that. I can, but the judge held up a hand. It requires the boys' consent, and it's permanent. No trial period, no taking it back if things get difficult. Clara looked at her boys. What do you think? Ben Harris and Milo exchanged their silent looks. Then Milo broke into a grin. We already chose each other. This just makes it official. Ben, Clara asked. Harris. Ben's storm-cloud eyes were bright with unshed tears. You'd really adopt us, even after everything, especially after everything, Clara said. Harris threw his arms around her waist. Yes. Yes, please. Judge Morrison pulled papers from his jacket. Then let's make it official. As Clara signed her name, making these three boys legally hers, Milo started humming again. But this time the others joined in, Harris with his clear voice, Ben with a low harmony. Even Clara found herself humming along. Mrs. Winters wiped tears from her eyes, and Dr. Whitman cleared his throat suspiciously. It's done, the judge said. They're yours, Mrs. Boone. Your sons. Sons. The word filled the kitchen like sunlight, warming every corner. But even as they celebrated, Clara knew this wasn't the end. Crane would be back with whatever reinforcements he could muster. The town was still divided about Milo's gift. The challenges ahead were real and daunting. Yet looking at her boys, her sons, Clara felt ready for whatever came next. They'd already survived so much. Together they could survive anything. The adoption papers were barely dry when the first letter arrived, slipped under the door in the dead of night. Clara found it while starting the morning fire. Her name written across the envelope in spidery handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside a single line, you've made a grave mistake. She burned it without showing the boys, but more letters came. Some threatening, some pleading, all unsigned. The town was splitting apart over the Boone boys as people had started calling them. For every person who smiled at them on the street, another crossed to avoid them. For every family that invited them to Sunday dinner, another forbade their children from playing with them. 2 weeks after the barn fire, Clara woke to find their vegetable garden destroyed. Every plant uprooted, tomatoes, smashed beans scattered. Milo stood at the kitchen window, tears streaming down his face. Who would do this? He whispered. Someone who wants us to be afraid, Clara said, though her own hands shook as she surveyed the damage. Months of work, their winter food supply gone. Ben's jaw was rigid with anger. We should leave. Go somewhere else, start over. This is our home, Clara said firmly. We don't run from bullies. But that night she heard Ben and Harris whispering in their room, making plans. Where they could go, how they could survive on their own, how they could protect Clara by disappearing. She wanted to go to them, tell them she'd never let them leave, but she understood their fear. They'd spent their whole lives being driven away. Why should this be different? It was Milo who gave her hope the next morning. He came to her with a handful of seeds he'd saved from the garden, somehow knowing before the destruction that they'd need them. We can replant, he said simply. Make it better than before. And they did. The whole town watched as the Boone family worked together, clearing the ruined garden and starting anew. Dr. Whitman brought vegetable starts from his own garden. Reverend Phillips organized a seed drive at church. Even Tommy Morrison showed up one afternoon wordlessly helping Ben repair the broken fence before disappearing. But Crane's shadow still loomed. They hadn't seen him since the barn fire, but Clara felt his presence like a storm building on the horizon. The boys felt it too. Ben had taken to sleeping with a knife under his pillow. Harris kept watch at windows. And Milo's nightmares were getting worse, filled with visions of fire and separation. It was the first week of October when everything changed. Clara was in town buying supplies while the boys were at school. Classes were being held in the church while the schoolhouse was rebuilt. She was loading sacks of flour into the wagon when Mrs. Henderson rushed up, face pale. "Clara, you need to get to the church. Now!" Clara's blood turned ice. "The boys—" "Just go. Quickly." Clara left the wagon and ran, her long skirts tangling around her legs. She could hear shouting before she reached the church. A crowd gathered outside. She pushed through, her heart hammering. In the churchyard, Crane stood with 5 other men, all armed. Facing them were her 3 boys, Ben standing protectively in front of his brothers, his face defiant despite the odds. "There she is," Crane said as Clara appeared, "the woman who stole my property." "They're my sons," Clara said, moving to stand with the boys, "legally adopted." "Under false pretenses." Crane pulled out a document. "I have here testimony from 3 separate foster families stating these boys are dangerous, statements about unexplained fires theft and the youngest one's demonic visions." "Those are lies," Harris shouted. "Are they?" Crane smiled. "Mrs. Garrett is prepared to testify that Milo predicted her death. The Johnsons will swear Ben attacked their son. The Petermans say Harris stole from them." "Because you paid them to lie," Ben said coldly. Judge Morrison stepped forward from the crowd. "Let me see those documents." Crane handed them over confidently. The judge read them, his face grave. "These are serious accusations." "Based on the testimony of people who aren't even here," Clara protested. "How do we know these are real?" "I can have the families here within a week," Crane said. "In the meantime, for the safety of the community, the boys should be placed in protective custody. Mine." "Over my dead body," Clara said. "That can be arranged," one of Crane's men muttered. The crowd stirred uneasily. Clara saw the town dividing before her eyes, those who believed in her boys and those who feared them. But there weren't enough of the former to stand against Crane's armed men. Then Milo stepped forward, his small voice carrying across the churchyard. "You killed your wife." Everything stopped. Crane's face went white, then red. "What did you say?" "Your wife," Milo said, his pale eyes unfocused, seeing something beyond the present. "Sarah. She didn't die of illness. You poisoned her. For the insurance money. Arsenic in her tea, a little each day until her heart gave out." "That's a lie," Crane snarled, but his voice cracked. "She knew." Milo continued, his voice taking on that strange older quality the boys had described. "At the end, she knew. She wrote it in her diary, hidden in the blue hat box in the attic of your house in Jefferson City. She wrote your name. She wrote what you did." Crane lunged for Milo, but Ben was faster, tackling him to the ground. Crane's men moved forward, but suddenly half the town stood with the Boones, Dr. Whitman, Reverend Phillips, the Hendersons, even Tommy Morrison and his friends. "Stop," Judge Morrison commanded. "Everyone stand down." Crane struggled to his feet, his face twisted with rage. "You're going to believe this devil child?" "I'm going to investigate," the judge said. "I'm telegraphing Jefferson City right now to have your house searched. This is ridiculous." But Crane was backing away now, his confidence shattered. "If the boy is wrong, you have nothing to fear," Dr. Whitman said. "If he's right—" Crane looked around wildly, saw the crowd turning against him. Even his own men were stepping back, uncertain. Without another word, he turned and ran, pushing through the crowd, heading for his horse. "Should we stop him?" someone called. "Let him go," Judge Morrison said. "If what Milo says is true, he won't get far. I'll telegraph every town between here and the state line." Clara gathered her boys close, feeling them tremble against her. The crowd was murmuring, some in awe, some in fear. She heard the words miracle and curse in equal measure. "Is it true?" she whispered to Milo. "About his wife." Milo nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't want to see it. It just came when he got close. all his darkness pouring out like spilled ink. That evening, as news spread through town, people began arriving at the Boone farm. Not with threats this time, but with questions, please. Mrs. Carson wanted to know if her missing son was still alive. Mr. Pruitt asked about his failing business. Others came with sick children, failing crops, lost loves. Clara turned them all away as gently as she could, but they kept coming. Milo hid in his room, overwhelmed by all the need and desperation. Ben and Harris stood guard, not letting anyone near their brother. "This is worse than the fear," Ben said grimly. "Now they want to use him." 3 days later, word came from Jefferson City. The diary had been found exactly where Milo said it would be. Sarah Crane had indeed documented her husband's slow poisoning, her growing certainty of what was happening, her despair that no one would believe her. Crane was captured trying to board a train to California. He would hang for murder. But Clara found no satisfaction in the news. The damage was done. Milo was marked now not as a cursed child, but as something perhaps worse, a miracle worker, a prophet, a tool to be used. "We have to leave," she told the boys that night. "Not because we're driven out, but because staying will destroy us. Destroy Milo." "Where would we go?" Harris asked. Clara pulled out a letter she'd received that morning. "My cousin Margaret lives in Chicago. She's a widow too, runs a boarding house near the university. She says there are schools there, opportunities. And in a city that big, one boy with strange gifts might not stand out so much." "But the farm," Ben said. "This is your home. Samuel's home." Clara looked around the kitchen where they'd shared so many meals, where she'd first fed 3 starving boys who'd become her sons. "Home isn't a place. It's people. You 3 are my home now." They spent the next week preparing. Clara arranged to sell the farm to the Hendersons' eldest son, who just married and needed land. She packed what they could carry, sold what they couldn't. The boys helped, though she could see it hurt them to leave this place where they'd first felt safe. The town's reaction was mixed. Some were relieved to see them go, the source of so much disruption removing itself. Others begged them to stay. Dr. Whitman offered to sponsor Milo's education, to study his gifts scientifically. Reverend Phillips preached about not driving out angels unaware. But it was Judge Morrison who surprised them most. He came the day before they left, bringing legal documents. "These are letters of introduction," he explained, "to colleagues in Chicago, lawyers, doctors, educators, people who can help you establish yourselves." He paused, looking at Milo. "I owe you my daughter's life. This is small repayment, but it's what I can offer." "Thank you," Clara said, touched by the gesture. "There's one more thing." The judge pulled out another paper. Crane had accomplices. Men who helped him traffic children. I have names, descriptions. Some may come after you seeking revenge. Be careful. Clara took the list, memorizing the names. She would protect her boys, no matter what came. Their last morning dawned gray and drizzly, fitting weather for goodbye. They stood in the cemetery, first Clara introducing the boys properly to Samuel. "These are our sons," she told the gravestone. "Ben Harris and Milo Boone. I think you would have loved them. I think they would have loved you." Ben placed a small carved horse on the grave. He'd been whittling it for weeks. "We'll take care of her, sir." Harris added a perfect river stone, smooth and green. "Thank you for building such a good home." Milo left a paper with a drawing, the farmhouse, with 5 figures standing in front of it. Samuel was there, sketched in lighter lines like a guardian ghost watching over them all. The ride to the train station was quiet. Clara had expected more of a send-off, but the town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for them to be gone. Only a few came to see them off: Dr. Whitman, Mrs. Winters, surprisingly, Tommy Morrison with his parents. "I'm sorry," Tommy said to Milo, "for hitting you. For being scared." "It's okay," and Milo said simply. "Fear makes people do things they don't mean." Tommy's mother, still pale from her daughter's near death, pressed a small package into Clara's hands. "For the journey," she whispered. As the train whistle blew, the boys climbed aboard, their faces pressed to the window. Clara took one last look at the town that had been her world for so long. She saw the rebuilt schoolhouse, the church steeple, the distant hills that bordered their farm. Know the Hendersons' farm now. "All aboard," the conductor called. Clara climbed up, settling between Ben and Harris, while Milo sat across from them. his pale eyes already focused on something beyond the window, some future only he could see. "Are you scared?" Harris asked her as the train began to move. "Terrified," Clara admitted, "but also excited. Aren't you?" "We've been scared our whole lives," Ben said. "This is just a different kind of scared." The train picked up speed, carrying them away from everything they'd known. Milo started humming again, that mysterious tune that had become their family anthem. This time Clara recognized it. It was an old lullaby her mother used to sing, one she'd hummed while pregnant with the babies she'd lost. Somehow, impossibly, Milo knew it. "How?" she asked him. He looked at her with those knowing eyes. "Some things are written in hearts, not memories. The song was waiting in you. I just helped it remember itself." As farmland gave way to unfamiliar territory, Clara pulled out the package Mrs. Morrison had given her. Inside were 4 train tickets, the ones she'd purchased, yes, but also 4 return tickets dated a year hence. A note was attached, "In case you want to come home." Clara showed it to the boys. "What do you think? Should we keep them?" Ben took the return tickets and with decisive movements tore them into pieces, letting them flutter out the window like snow. "We don't go backward, only forward. Together," Harris added. "Always," Milo confirmed. The journey to Chicago took 2 days with an overnight stop in St. Louis. Clara had wired ahead to Margaret, who promised to meet them at Union Station. The boys had never been in a city before, and their eyes grew wide as buildings grew taller and crowds grew thicker. "There are so many people," Harris breathed. "Good," Ben said firmly. "Easier to disappear, easier to be normal." But Clara knew none of them would ever be normal. Ben with his fierce protectiveness and old soul. Harris with his gentle heart and surprising strength. Milo with his impossible gift and ancient wisdom. And herself a widow who'd chosen love over safety, family over familiarity. The second night on the train, Milo woke screaming, not from nightmares this time, but from visions. "Fire," he gasped. "Chicago, everywhere, the whole city burning." "When?" Clara asked, holding him close. "Not now. Later, years maybe, but I can see it, buildings falling, people running the lake reflecting flames like the world is ending." "Then we'll be ready," Clara said. "We'll warn people if we can protect ourselves if we can't, but we won't live in fear of tomorrow." Milo nodded, calming. "You're different now, stronger." "We all are," Clara said, looking at her boys. "That's what family does, makes you stronger than you thought you could be." As dawn broke on their last day of travel, revealing the approaching skyline of Chicago, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. Not the desperate hope she'd felt taking in the boys, not the defensive determination of protecting them from Crane, but genuine excitement for what lay ahead. "Look." Harris pointed out the window at Lake Michigan, stretching to the horizon like an inland ocean. "It's so big." "Everything's big here," Ben said, but he was smiling, a real boyish smile Clara had rarely seen. Margaret was waiting on the platform, a stout woman with Clara's same determined jaw and kind eyes. She took one look at the boys and opened her arms wide. "So these are my nephews," she said warmly. "Welcome to Chicago, boys. Welcome to your new life." As they made their way through the crowded station, Milo slipped his hand into Clara's. "Mrs. Boone, Ma, this is right. This is where we're supposed to be." "How do you know?" Clara asked. "Because," Milo said simply, "I can't see the ending anymore. Just possibilities, hundreds and hundreds of possibilities." "Is that good or bad?" "It's perfect," Milo said. "It means we get to choose." The boarding house was a narrow 4-story building squeezed between similar structures with worn carpets and creaking stairs, but scrupulously clean. Margaret had prepared rooms on the 3rd floor, one for Clara, one for the boys. "It's not a farmhouse," Margaret said apologetically. "It's perfect," Clara assured her, watching her boys explore their new space with wonder. That first evening in Chicago, as they sat around Margaret's dinner table with 3 other boarders, a university student, a seamstress, and a railroad clerk, Clara realized something. For the first time since taking in the boys, no one stared at them with suspicion or awe. They were just another family in a city full of families, each with their own stories and struggles. "Tomorrow we'll enroll you in school," Clara told the boys. "There's one just 2 blocks away." "What if they ask about before?" Harris worried. "We tell them the truth," Clara said. "Or at least part of it. You're my adopted sons from Missouri. Everything else is our business." That night, she tucked them in for the last time in their new beds, in their new room, in their new city. The sounds outside were different carriages instead of crickets, voices instead of wind, but the important sounds were the same. Ben's steady breathing, Harris's quiet humming, Milo's occasional whispered observations about tomorrow. "Ma," Ben called softly. It was the first time he'd used the word. "Yes." "Thank you for choosing us, for fighting for us, for bringing us here." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for saving me." "We saved each other," Harris said sleepily. "That's what families do," Milo added, already half asleep. Clara stood in their doorway for a long moment, watching over them as she had that first night in the farmhouse. So much had changed. They'd lost a home, but found themselves. They'd faced evil and chosen good. They'd been marked as different and decided different was exactly what they wanted to be. Somewhere out there, Crane's accomplices might still be hunting them. The gift that lived in Milo would continue to bring both wonder and danger. The scars the boys carried from their past would take years to fully heal, if they ever did. But tonight, in this narrow room, in this enormous city, they were safe. They were together. They were family. Clara made her way to her own room, Margaret's borrowed nightgown soft against her skin. She stood at the window looking out at the gaslit streets below. Somewhere in this city were the schools Ben would excel in the music halls, where Harris's voice would soar the libraries, where Milo would search for answers about his gift. Somewhere in this city was their future, uncertain, but bright with possibility. She thought of Samuel, of the farmhouse, of the life she'd planned that had never come to pass. She thought of 3 boys standing on an auction block with sacks over their heads, and the moment that changed everything when one whispered her name. God told him she would come, Milo had said. Maybe it was true. Maybe there was a plan larger than any of them could see, weaving their broken pieces into something whole. Or maybe it was simply this: sometimes love comes from unexpected places in unexpected forms. Sometimes family isn't born, but chosen, forged in fire, and strengthened by trials. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. Clara closed the curtains and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The boys would struggle with city life, with new schools, with the memories that haunted them. Milo's gift wouldn't stay hidden forever. The past had a way of catching up no matter how far you ran. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Boone fell asleep without grief as her companion. Instead, she dreamed of possibilities, hundreds and hundreds of them, stretching out like tracks from Union Station, each leading somewhere different, but all beginning right here with 3 boys who called her Ma and a love that had transformed them all. In the room next door, Milo suddenly sat up, his eyes wide but unseeing. "She's coming," he whispered. "Who can?" Ben asked, instantly alert. "The girl with red hair, the one who needs us. She's coming to the boarding house tomorrow. She's like me, she sees things, and she's running from someone bad." Ben and Harris exchanged glances. Their family, it seemed, wasn't finished growing yet. "Should we tell Ma?" Harris asked. "In the morning," Ben decided. "Let her sleep. She's earned one peaceful night." They settled back down, but all 3 boys lay awake thinking about this girl who was coming, this new chapter beginning. Outside Chicago hummed with life, unaware that in one narrow boarding house something extraordinary was taking root, a family bound not by blood but by choice, not by normalcy but by the very things that made them different. The Boone family was home. The next morning arrived with a thunderclap that shook the boarding house windows. Rain lashed against the glass as Clara prepared breakfast in Margaret's kitchen, the boys already dressed for their first day at their new school. Milo kept glancing toward the front door, his pale eyes distant and watchful. "She's close," he murmured into his porridge. Before Clara could ask what he meant, the front door burst open. A girl stumbled in from the storm, perhaps 13 years old, her red hair plastered to her head, her dress torn and muddy. She clutched a carpet bag to her chest like her life depended on it, and her green eyes were wild with terror. Margaret rushed from the parlor. "Good heavens, child, come in! Come away from the door!" But the girl pressed herself against the wall, scanning the faces in the hallway. When her gaze landed on Milo, she gasped. "You're the one, the boy who knows things. I saw you in my dreams." "Rose," Milo said simply. "Your name is Rose O'Brien, and you ran from the asylum where they put you because you could see when people were lying." The girl's knees buckled. Clara caught her before she fell, feeling how thin she was beneath the soaked dress, how violently she trembled. "Please," Rose whispered. "They're coming. Dr. Marlowe and his men. They want to cut into my brain, make the vision stop. They did it to the others, turned them into empty shells. Please don't let them take me back." Clara looked at Margaret, who nodded without hesitation. "Get her upstairs. Ben Harris helped me move the furniture to block the door. Milo, can you see how much time we have?" Milo closed his eyes, his face tightening with concentration. 10 minutes, maybe less. They have legal papers. They'll say she's dangerous and sane." Clara half-carried Rose up the stairs while the boys and Margaret barricaded the entrance. In Clara's room, she helped the girl out of her wet clothes and into one of her own dresses, far too large but dry and warm. "How did you know about Milo?" Clara asked, rubbing Rose's hair with a towel. "The same way he knew your name that first day up," Rose said. "I see things that haven't happened yet, people who don't exist yet, or at least don't exist in my life yet. I saw him in the dreams, saw all of you, a family that takes in the strange ones, the broken ones. How long have you been running?" 3 days. The asylum is north of here. Dr. Marlowe does experiments on people like us. People who see things know things. He says he's trying to help, but..." She shuddered. "I watched him drill holes in Timothy's skull. Timothy could hear people's thoughts. After the surgery, he couldn't even remember his own name." Heavy pounding on the door below made them both freeze. Clara heard authoritative voices demanding entry, Margaret's steady refusal, then the sound of splintering wood. "Stay here," Clara ordered, but Rose grabbed her arm. "Don't go down there. I've seen what happens if you do. You get arrested for harboring a fugitive. The boys get sent back to institutions. Everything falls apart." "Then what do we do?" Rose's eyes blazed with desperate determination. "We run, out the back through the alley. I've seen the path." Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed their emergency bag she'd learned to always keep one packed and rushed to the boys' room. They were already there, Ben holding a knife, Harris clutching Milo protectively. "Backstairs," Clara said tersely. "Now." They moved as one. Rose leading despite her exhaustion. Down the narrow servants' stairs through the kitchen where Margaret stood firm, facing down 3 men in dark coats. "I told you there's no girl here," Margaret was saying loudly, clearly warning them. Dr. Marlowe, a thin man with cold eyes behind wire spectacles, pushed past her. "We have witnesses who saw her enter. Harboring an escaped mental patient is a serious crime, madam." Clara ushered the children out the back door into the rain-soaked alley. They ran, feet splashing through puddles, Rose leading them through a maze of back streets she'd never seen, but somehow knew. Behind them, shouts erupted. They'd been discovered missing. "This way," Rose gasped, turning into a narrower alley. "There's a church. Father O'Malley. He helps people like us." "How do you know?" Harris panted. "I dreamed it last night. Sometimes I dream things just before I need them." The church was small, squeezed between tenements, its door marked only by a simple cross. Rose pounded on it with desperate fists. "Father O'Malley, please, it's Rose O'Brien. You don't know me yet, but you will." The door opened to reveal an elderly priest with kind eyes that widened at the sight of them, 5 people soaked and terrified, fleeing something. "Come in, children, quickly now." He ushered them into the dim sanctuary, locking the door behind them. "Now then, what's so?" "Dr. Marlowe from the Riverside Asylum," Rose interrupted. "He's after me. He'll be here soon. You have a hidden room beneath the altar. Your brother built it during the draft riots to hide Irish families." Father O'Malley's eyebrows rose. "How could you possibly know about that?" "The same way I know your mother's name was Bridget and she died calling for you," Rose said quietly. "The same way I know you've been praying for a sign about whether to stay in Chicago or accept the position in Boston." The priest crossed himself. Saints preserve us. We're not saints, Milo said. We're just different. Father O'Malley studied them for a long moment, then nodded. Follow me. He led them behind the altar, moving a section of floor that revealed steep steps down into darkness. There are candles and blankets down there. I'll come for you when it's safe. They descended into the hidden room, which was larger than Clara expected, with stone walls that held the cold like winter. The children huddled together while Clara lit candles with shaking hands. I'm sorry, Rose whispered. I brought danger to you. I shouldn't have come. Yes, you should have, Milo said firmly. You're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be with us. How can you know that? The same way you knew where to find us. Milo smiled. We're collecting each other. The strange ones, the ones who don't fit. We're making our own family. Above them, they heard the church door bang open heavy footsteps, Dr. Marlowe's cultured voice demanding to search the premises. Father O'Malley's calm responses neither confirming nor denying. She's dangerous, Dr. Marlowe was saying. The girl has delusions, violent episodes. She attacked an orderly. He was trying to force medication down my throat, Rose whispered fiercely. Medicine that made everything fuzzy made the visions worse instead of better. The footsteps moved directly overhead. Everyone held their breath. Clara pulled all 4 children close, ready to fight if necessary, though she knew it would be hopeless against armed men with legal authority. Then, unexpectedly, another voice joined the conversation above. A woman's voice, strong and commanding. Dr. Marlowe, I'm Mrs. Adelaide Pemberton from the Chicago Reform Society. I understand you're pursuing a young patient. Clara recognized the name. Adelaide Pemberton was one of the city's most powerful reformers, married to a wealthy industrialist known for her campaigns against child labor and institutional abuse. This is a medical matter, madam, Dr. Marlowe said dismissively. Is it because I've been investigating your asylum for months now? The unexplained deaths, the surgical experiments, the children who enter with minor nervous conditions and leave as vegetables if they leave at all. Those are baseless accusations. Are they? I have testimonies from former employees, families of patients, and now you're hunting a 13-year-old girl through the streets like an animal. Tell me, doctor, what crime has she committed? She's mentally disturbed. According to whose diagnosis? Yours, the man who profits from keeping beds filled, who receives government funding based on patient numbers. The silence above was tense. Clara felt Rose trembling against her. We have legal custody, Dr. Marlowe finally said. Show me the papers. Rustling sounds, then Mrs. Pemberton's laugh, sharp as winter ice. These are commitment papers signed by a guardian. Tell me who is Rose O'Brien's legal guardian. She's an orphan. The state has no record of Rose O'Brien. I checked, which means these papers are fraudulent and you're attempting kidnapping. This is ridiculous. What's ridiculous, doctor, is that you think you can continue these practices without consequence. Father O'Malley, I trust you'll keep me informed if you encounter any children in need of protection. Of course, Mrs. Pemberton, the priest replied mildly. Doctor, I suggest you leave, now, before I contact my husband's lawyers and the newspapers he owns. More footsteps retreating this time, the church door slamming. They waited in tense silence for long minutes before Father O'Malley's face appeared above them. It's safe now. Come up, children. They emerged to find Mrs. Pemberton waiting, a formidable woman in an expensive blue dress, her gray hair perfectly arranged despite the weather. Her sharp eyes took in their bedraggled group with interest. Father O'Malley sent a message to me the moment you arrived, she explained. He knew I'd been looking for evidence against Marlowe. She focused on Rose. My dear, would you be willing to testify about what happens in that asylum? Rose lifted her chin. Yes, but I won't go back. I'll die before I go back. You won't have to. Mrs. Pemberton turned to Clara. You must be the Mrs. Boone I've heard about, the widow who adopted 3 orphan boys under unusual circumstances. Clara stiffened. How do you know about us? My dear, very little happens in Chicago that I don't hear about, especially when it involves children with unusual abilities. She smiled at Milo. You're the boy who sees things, aren't you? And you... She looked at Rose. You have a similar gift. They're not gifts, Rose said bitterly. They're curses. They're tools, Mrs. Pemberton corrected. And like any tool, they can be used for good or ill. The question is, will you let men like Marlowe define what you are, or will you define yourself? She pulled out a card, handing it to Clara. I run a private school for exceptional children. Not exceptional in the way society usually means wealthy or well-connected, but truly exceptional. Different, special. Gifted in ways that frighten ordinary people. A school for freaks, Ben said flatly. A school for pioneers, Mrs. Pemberton corrected, for children who will change the world if given the chance. She studied them all. I could arrange scholarships, all 4 of them. 5, Milo said suddenly. There will be 5. The boy who talks to machines is coming. Mrs. Pemberton's eyes sharpened. When? Milo shrugged. Soon, days, maybe weeks. His name is Thomas, and he can make broken things work just by touching them. He's escaping from a factory where they've been using him to keep the machines running. Then we'll be ready for him, Mrs. Pemberton said simply, as if a 7-year-old predicting the future was perfectly normal. They returned to Margaret's boarding house to find the front door repaired, and Margaret herself calmly serving tea to the boarders, as if armed men hadn't invaded that morning. Clara, you're back, she said mildly. This young lady's room is ready, 3rd floor next to yours. You prepared a room? Clara asked, amazed. Margaret smiled. When you wrote that you were coming with 3 unusual boys, I suspected your family might grow. Strange attracts strange, after all. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, now expanded with an extra chair for Rose, Clara watched her unconventional family. Ben was explaining city navigation to Rose. Harris was humming while helping Margaret with dishes, and Milo was drawing pictures of a boy surrounded by gears and steam. Tell me about the school, Clara said to Rose, who'd already had visions of it. Rose's eyes went distant. It's in a big house on Prairie Avenue. There are only 12 students each with something that makes them different. A girl who can find anything that's lost. A boy who remembers everything he's ever seen or heard. Twins who share thoughts. She paused. And us. It sounds too good to be true, Ben said suspiciously. Most good things do, Rose replied. But I've seen us there. All of us, including Thomas when he comes. We're happy. We're learning. We're safe. For how long, ya? Harris asked quietly. In our experience, safe never lasts. Rose was quiet for a moment. I see fire, she admitted. Not soon, but coming. A great fire that swallows the city. But we survive it. We help others survive it. The school becomes a refuge. The fire I saw, Milo breathed. You see it too. Rose nodded. We can't prevent it. It's too big, involves too many factors. But we can prepare. We can save lives. Well, Clara felt the weight of this knowledge, terrible future knowledge, that her children would have to carry. But then she looked at them, really looked. They weren't broken by their gifts anymore. They were learning to use them to support each other, to find strength in their strangeness. The next morning, they visited Mrs. Pemberton's school. The building was indeed grand, a limestone mansion that spoke of serious money, but inside it felt more like a home than an institution. Children's artwork covered the walls, and the sound of laughter echoed from upstairs. Mrs. Pemberton gave them a tour herself. In one room, a girl about Rose's age was finding lost items for a grateful policeman. In another, the boy with perfect memory was helping a lawyer prepare for a case. The twins sat in the garden silently playing chess, each moving the other's pieces without speaking. We don't hide what they can do, Mrs. Pemberton explained. We teach them to use their abilities responsibly, productively. Some will become doctors, lawyers, investigators. Others will be artists, inventors, leaders. But all will know they're not alone. What's the cost? Clara asked bluntly. Nothing this good is free. You're right. The cost is commitment. The children must agree to help others with their gifts when called upon. They must support and protect each other, and they must be willing to stand up for others like them. Mrs. Pemberton smiled. Think of it as training the next generation of reformers and protectors. We're in, Ben said immediately, then looked embarrassed. I mean, if Ma agrees. Clara's heart swelled at his easy use of ma now. "We're in," she confirmed. The first weeks at the Pemberton school were an adjustment. The other students were wary at first. They'd all been hurt by the world's reaction to their differences. But gradually, walls came down. Ben connected with a boy named Marcus who could feel the emotions of anyone he touched. They practiced together, Ben learning to shield his fierce protectiveness so it wouldn't overwhelm Marcus, helping Ben understand the feelings he'd buried for so long. Harris found his place with the music teacher who recognized that his perfect pitch and ability to reproduce any sound he heard could be more than parlor tricks. Soon he was composing simple melodies, his voice soaring in the mansion's music room. Rose and the girl who found lost things, Sarah, became inseparable. They discovered their gifts worked in complement. Rose seeing what would be lost, Sarah finding it before it disappeared. And Milo bloomed. For the first time, his gift wasn't feared or worshipped, but simply accepted. Mrs. Pemberton worked with him personally, teaching him to control the visions rather than being controlled by them. "You're like a radio receiver," she explained. "Right now, you're picking up every signal at once. We need to teach you to tune into specific frequencies." Clara found her own place at the school, helping Mrs. Pemberton with administration, mothering not just her 4, but all 12 students in small ways. She learned their names, their fears, their hopes. She became the stable center they all orbited around. 3 weeks after they started, Thomas arrived. It happened just as Milo had predicted. The boy, perhaps 9 years old, stumbled into the mansion's garden, where the children were taking their lunch. His clothes were scorched, his hands bleeding, his dark skin covered in ash and oil. "Please," he gasped. "The factory exploded. They'll blame me. They always blame me when machines break, but this time I didn't touch it. I swear." Clara reached him first, gathering him into her arms. "You're safe now. No one's blaming you for anything." Thomas looked up at her with desperate brown eyes. "The foreman's dead. The machine exploded and he's dead. And they'll say I did it because I'm the machine boy, the one who makes them work." "Shh," Clara soothed. "We know who you are. We've been waiting for you." "Waiting?" Thomas pulled back confused. Milo stepped forward. "I saw you coming. Rose did too. You're supposed to be here with us." "With you?" "We're the strange ones," Harris said with a gentle smile. "The ones who don't fit. But here, not fitting is exactly right." Thomas looked around at them, all children who should have been afraid of him, but weren't adults who should have been calling the authorities, but didn't. "The machines talk to me," he whispered. "They tell me what's wrong with them, how to fix them. Sometimes I can make them work without tools just by asking nicely." "That's amazing," Ben said firmly. "You're amazing." Thomas burst into tears, the relieved, exhausted tears of a child who'd been carrying too much for too long. Clara held him while he cried, feeling her family expand once more. The investigation into the factory explosion revealed what the children already knew. A boiler had been neglected. Warnings, ignored safety measures, skipped to save money. Thomas had actually kept it running far longer than it should have, his gift, the only thing preventing an earlier disaster. When it finally failed, he had managed to evacuate most of the workers, though the foreman who'd beaten him for being too slow had refused to leave his office. Mrs. Pemberton's lawyers made sure Thomas was cleared of any wrongdoing. More importantly, they made sure he was legally placed in Clara's care. 5 children now. Margaret said that evening, watching Clara tuck Thomas into the small room they'd prepared for him. Planning on more, Clara thought of Milo's visions, Rose's dreams, the sense they all had that their family wasn't complete yet. "Maybe. Is that crazy?" "Everything about your life is crazy," Margaret said fondly. "But it's the good kind of crazy, the kind that changes the world." That night, Clara found all 5 children in the boys' room huddled together on the big bed. Thomas was in the middle, the others surrounding him protectively, as Ben told one of his stories. This one was about 5 children with magical powers who saved a city from a terrible fire. "Is that us?" Thomas asked sleepily. "Maybe," Ben said. "Or maybe it's just a story." "It's both," Rose said with quiet certainty. "Stories and truth aren't as different as people think." Clara stood in the doorway watching them, her strange, wonderful, impossible family, 5 children who shouldn't exist according to the world's rules, but who existed anyway, defiantly, brilliantly. "Ma," Milo called softly, "will you stay until we fall asleep?" She settled into the chair by the window, watching over them as she had that first night in the farmhouse. So much had changed the place, the number of children, the challenges they faced. But the essential thing remained the same. They had chosen each other. They protected each other. They were family. As the children drifted off to sleep, Clara noticed something new in their peaceful faces. The hunted look was fading. The constant vigilance was easing. They were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have a future that wasn't about running or hiding, but about becoming who they were meant to be. But even as hope bloomed, Clara couldn't shake the warnings about fire. Both Milo and Rose had seen it, a great burning that would test them all. She looked out the window at the gas-lit streets of Chicago, the wooden buildings packed close together, the industrial smokestacks painting the sky gray. When it came, and she now believed it would come, they would be ready. Her children would use their gifts to save lives. They would prove that being different wasn't a curse, but a responsibility, a chance to help when others couldn't. The clock downstairs chimed midnight. October was nearly over, winter approaching. Clara pulled a blanket over the sleeping children, Ben's arm protective around Thomas Harris, and Rose, holding hands, Milo humming even in sleep. "Whatever comes," she whispered to them, to herself, to the future that waited with both promise and peril, "we'll face it together." A sound from outside made her look up. In the street below, a figure stood watching the boarding house. For a moment, Clara's heart seized. Was it one of Crane's associates, Dr. Marlowe? Some new threat. But then the figure stepped into the gaslight's glow, and Clara saw it was a young woman, perhaps 20, with Indian features and clothes that marked her as foreign. She looked up at Clara's window and raised one hand in what might have been greeting or warning. Then she turned and vanished into the shadows. "Ma." Milo's voice was thick with sleep but alert. "Did you see her?" "Yes." "She's important. She's coming to teach us something. Something we'll need for the fire." "When?" "Soon, but not yet. She's still deciding if she can trust us." Clara nodded, adding one more mystery to the collection that seemed to follow her family. "Sleep now. Tomorrow's challenges will come whether we rest or not." She stayed until all their breathing deepened into true sleep, then made her way to her own room. On her dresser lay the photographs she'd brought from the farm. Samuel, the farmhouse, her parents. Next to them, she'd placed new ones, sketches Rose had drawn of all of them together. Thomas's mechanical diagrams. Harris's first written song. Ben's carved animals. Milo's prophetic drawings. 2 families, 2 lives bridged by loss and found through love. Outside Chicago hummed with life and danger, promise and threat. Somewhere, Dr. Marlowe was plotting to reclaim Rose. Somewhere, the woman in the street was weighing whether to approach them. Somewhere, the ingredients for a great fire were slowly combining, a kicked lantern, dry wood, October wind. But tonight in Margaret's boarding house, 5 extraordinary children slept peacefully, protected by 2 widowed women who'd learned that family could be built from the broken pieces of many lives. Tonight they were safe. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: school, suspicious neighbors, the constant need to balance their gifts with the world's fear of difference. But Clara no longer faced tomorrow with dread. She faced it with anticipation. Because she wasn't alone anymore. Neither were her children. They had each other, and that was more powerful than any individual gift. The strange ones had found their home,